welcome. It's a very important occasion for anybody who is interested in farming, either as a farmer or as a policymaker or even as a consumer. Because when we looked at some of the old publications of Bharat Krishak Samaj, we found that there is tremendous value in some of these. Because if you look at decision making in any government, any regime, any society, there is a context. In that context, you take that decision. So in the 40s, 50s, you know what we were. How did India look at agriculture and food self-sufficiency? And the most interesting part was that the government decided that consultation with farmers' organizations and farmers' groups were very necessary, because they cannot really reach out to every single farmer and say what it wanted to say. And also it was important to understand what the farmers think of some of these. And it's very interesting, that journey, how together between farmers, policymakers, scientists, researchers, everybody together, we have reached where we are. Now we talk very proudly of agricultural exports. We talk about all kinds of things from a point of view of surplus. But we were not a surplus country, and that is extremely important. And as Ajay said, when we looked at some of these things, of course, some of them were here, some of them were there, some of them were everywhere. So we said we'll put them out together into a digital format. That was not easy. It took a lot of time and effort. And you know that Bharat Krishak Samaj doesn't have sponsors. You don't find any sponsor's name in the background. You go to many of the government institutions, you will find large number of companies who are sponsors. And when somebody sponsors, obviously there is some agenda behind it. So to stay very neutral and absolutely secular across all formats, it was very important for us to stay within our budget. And that was a difficult task, but luckily we had a lot of people who volunteered to help, and we are here. I mean, people who guided us, you will see them in the... Please come, please come. So this is the short part of our journey to digitize these. Okay, now let me do the formal welcome before I continue. We welcome Dr. V. No, it's okay. Dr. Anantha Nageswaran, Chief Economic Advisor to the Government of India. Of course, you all know him. I don't want to give you a long introduction of what he has written and how many books and articles he has written. I think we all keep reading them. But I think the outstanding piece I read recently was the economic survey. And I must compliment you on that. I think, especially on the chapter on agriculture, I think we were all very excited to read that bit. We hope we'll take it forward. We also have Dr. Sanjay Garg, who is the Deputy Director of the National Archives of India. And thank you, Dr. Garg, for coming, because very many people don't look at archives seriously, and I think I'm right. It's there somewhere, but it holds a huge amount of knowledge and a huge amount of data, which I think people who would be in the policy space should need to look at. I'm happy he's here, and this is our small effort to contribute to the larger idea of creating an archive across the country for many things. Now, I would only read one small bit from the mandate of the BKS when it was formed, and it was formed by Punjab Rao Deshmukh, who was a minister in the union government, and that story all of you know. in his own words, it is being formed to create a common meeting ground where farmers, government officials, agriculture research workers, businessmen, extension and marketing experts, members of legislatures, in fact, all men and women who are interested in strengthening the agricultural economy of the country can meet together and utilize their intelligence, resources, and energy to study and solve the day-to-day problems of agriculture and help those engaged in this work to produce more from their land. Now this, I think, sums up the whole idea of how this was formed. So it stayed neutral, it stayed secular on many angles, and it continues to now get into the newer technological era by putting up these archives. I know there are very many controversial things in these archives, but I'm sure researchers will find it very, very interesting to look at what was the thinking process at that time. How did, in fact, there are also some photographs of how the first tractor came into India and how somebody made a tractor and stuff like this. So it's going to be a lot of learning for people who are interested in research in policy and to understand the context and the thought process that governed some of these decisions. This is an open source, free of cost, except of course I think you may have to fill in your email ID, etc., to download something, because that's more a cyber security requirement. But and BKS is not going to make any money out of it. But if we find that people are using it more, I think we would need to put the next 20 years, 25 years of data into the archives. But we thought we will roll out the first phase, and I am sure that people across not only India but the world who want to look at how India evolved into an agricultural powerhouse would find it very interesting reading, and policymakers would find the context in which some of these decisions were taken very revealing, which would probably give them a guiding light towards future policy options. Thank you very much. May I now request Dr. Sanjay Garg for his keynote address.
Namaskar, Chairman BKS, Mr. Chakar, President Shri Nandakumar ji, Dr. Nageswaran, and all the distinguished delegates from different parts of the country. Let me begin by narrating a personal anecdote. I did my master's in history, and after that I did a PG diploma in archival studies. So one of my teachers was one Mr. Ghosh, and he used to narrate one incident that when he came of marriageable age, so लड़की वाले ने पूछा कि लड़का करता क्या है, तो उन्होंने कहा आर्किविस्ट है, लेकिन वो तो ठीक है, लेकिन करता क्या है. So even now when I tell people that I work in the archives, so they say, oh, archaeology. I said, no, archaeology is different, this is archives. So as Mr. Nandakumar was saying that not much information about the tremendous amount of work which goes into building an archives, managing archives goes in, is not something which people readily comprehend. So what does the archivist do? Archivists serve as a memory keeper. We all have our lifelong association with the records. Now there are three terms we use interchangeably: documents, records, and archives. There's a slight difference. Not all documents are records, and not all records are definitely archives. If you see the dictionary meaning, records are something which we are engaged with in the pursuance of our legal obligation or in the transaction of our business, whether it's a government business or private business. Even before a child is born, brought into this world, his record is created in the hospital. And throughout the life, educational journey, your career, your insurance, your bank details. We are dealing with the records day in and day out. Even after a person dies, a death certificate is required. That is a record. So we have got this lifelong association with records, and yet we are sometimes very oblivious to the importance of these records. So the role of the archives is something akin to what the role of a brain in a human body. It is a collective memory of a community or a nation. So that's the archives, and many of you who are familiar with Delhi or who live in Delhi, when you pass through the Janpath road, there's a big red sandstone building called the National Archives of India, where I work. And when I tell people that, okay, this building is older than the India Gate, older than the Rashtrapati Bhavan, older than the old parliament, they're surprised. In fact, when the New Delhi was announced by the British, in the first phase, only 5 buildings were commissioned. The Sansad Bhavan, which was called the Legislative Assembly at that time, the Rashtrapati Bhavan, which was the Vice-Regal Palace, the 2 Secretariat blocks, and the Imperial Record Department. And this was the first to get complete in 1926. And here we have got it's one of the largest archival collection of South Asia. What does it do? It's like a bank locker where you put your valuables. So a bank doesn't become the owner of your valuables, but it is very much responsible for the safe upkeep, safety and care of the collection that you deposit. So archives are spread all over. In fact, we did some sort of a estimation or guesstimation, you can say. In the National Archives of India, we measure our collection in linear kilometers. So we have got about 60 linear kilometers of shelf space occupied by records. That means if you put all the shelves in one row, you will travel 60 kilometers. That's only a fragment of the archival wealth that we hold in this country. We are having about, say, 34 crore pages, which are being increasingly digitized. The states have about 300 crore pages, all the states. The judicial archives, starting from the district courts and all, going up to the High Court and Supreme Court, about 600 crore pages. The individual collection would be, again, about 600 crore pages. And at the district level, where you have got the post offices, the police establishment, the jails, the revenue officers. So again, about 700. So we are talking of a huge amount of archival collection that we are having. The manuscripts, in practically every household you will find manuscript, some old text. And under the Ministry of Culture, there's a national mission on manuscript, which has estimated there are about 2 lakh owners which hold about 1 crore manuscripts dating back to several centuries. So the difference between an archives and library is that, unlike the library book that if you lose a copy, you get another copy in some other library, the records that archives hold are a unique specimen of that content. There are no duplicates. So if you lose one, you are going to lose that information forever. So archives administration in that sense becomes very, very important, which targets, which has a 2-pronged approach. One is the preservation, both physical and the content preservation, and the dissemination of that information. There's no point in holding the information, caring and conserving it without being unable to share it with the larger users. In fact, the preservation part is something which is ingrained in our culture. If you see the old pothis, जो ग्रंथ होते थे पुराने, उसमें जो लास्ट में जो कोलोफोन होता है, तो कोलोफोन में invariably there's a Sanskrit shloka which says something like that Jalad Rakshed अग्न्याद रक्षेत मूषकेभ्यो विशेषतः कष्टेन लिखितम शास्त्रम यत्नवत परिपालयेत. So I have written this Granth with very utmost labor. So you take very good care. Sometimes this yatnet paripalayet is changed with putravat paripalayet. अपने पुत्र जैसी रक्षा करो उसकी. So we had this sense of preservation of the written text, and there are about 600 odd archives, which BKS archives is not included as yet on that, and for which a digital platform has been created by the National Archives of India. Various type of material these archives hold, from the records to documents. And as I said that, each piece of these records, each piece of this document is unique in its character. To give you one example, in National Archives of India, we have got the original FIR of Mahatma Gandhi's assassination, recorded in Tughlaq Road police station at that time. And if you remember, when this film Gandhi was released, there was a controversy whether Mahatma Gandhi did or did not say these two words, Hey Ram, when he was shot. And if you see this FIR is in Urdu, and it is recorded by the sub-inspector who was on duty at that time. And he writes के उनको गोली लगी और वो राम राम कहते हुए ज़मीन पर गिर पड़े. It's recorded in the FIR. So, the evidence, the documentary evidence is there for everyone to see. And it becomes very incontrovertible. Then there are photographs, then there are cartographic material, there are manuscripts, as I told you, private papers. Many of the people who were never part of the government, or even if they were part of the government, they had their own, other roles, like a literature. Dr. Sampurnanand was a literature in his own right, apart from a politician. Again, I'll give you one example from the National Archives of India collection. We have got a diary of Janakinath Bose, Netaji's father, and the date of the diary, the year of the diary is 1893. And on 23rd January, there's a 3-line entry which reads something like, Prabha was in pain since last night, a son was born in the midday. So all these archives, they, as I said, they are the unconscious creation of history. When you are recording it, you are not aware that, okay, after 50 years hence or 100 years hence, what would be the historical significance of this piece that I am writing today. So a lot of care has to be taken. Private archives, then the rare publications, excellent collection here of the BKS, which will be launched in a while. Oral archives, which has the recorded interviews of eminent personnel, giving their experiences in digital or video format. In fact, I was reading there in Amsterdam in Netherlands, they are creating a smell and odor archives. The premise is that there are certain smells which we are losing by each passing day. The smell of the first rain, the smell of the earth and other things. Digital archives, of course. So I had the privilege of having a preview of the BK archives. Thank you, Dr. Mini, for that, giving the link. And 7,000 plus items are there in public domain. Congratulations. It's a tremendous job, and making it, that's the democratization of information. That's how it should be. I think it's a role model which other archives should follow. Talking about the domain expertise of these archives, that's agriculture and the related issues. I'm reminded of Mahatma Gandhi once again. In fact, one of his first political movement after he returned from South Africa in 1915 was Champaran. And the Champaran, he went there at the invitation of the peasants who were under duress and misery, living a miserable life. And those papers are again deposited in the National Archives of India. The Tinkatia Mazdoor, the indigo planters. And that was the first satyagraha on the soil of India, Indian subcontinent, which Mahatma Gandhi has launched. So I wish all the best to the efforts of the BKS and the team of the BKS archives. I see it grow in the years and days to come. Oral archives is one suggestion which there's a lot of material, a lot of experiences which go away with the people, which you must think of incorporating. The other thing is that there are several local traditions. And I come from the Hindi belt, and there are so many agricultural proverbs of Garg, for example. There was no IMD at that department, and all this, the idioms and proverbs, they were very, very popular. So somebody should collect them and put them online, because if you lose them, you lose them. And of course, the private papers. In fact, before coming to this meeting, I was looking at our own collection, and there was a file of 1964, and the issue was establishment of an Indo-American Educational and Cultural Foundation. And as a part of that PL 480, the rupee, dollar rupee fund. And that file, I've read it here, it mentions Bharat Krishak Samaj, BKS. It says Bharat Krishak Samaj, Farmers Forum India, cooperates with the US organization and looks for the program of visiting American farmers. There was a plan of having a farmers exchange, not cultural exchange, but agricultural exchange. It is also responsible for selecting Indian delegates. And there are lots of material on the founder, Dr. Punjab Rao Deshmukh, who was for 10 long years, he was MOS Agriculture. So I'm very happy to be amongst you on this very, very important occasion of launching of the BKS archives, and I wish all the best. As in our place, they say the Annadata Sukhi Bhava. So with this pious wish, I take your leave. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Garg. Now may I request Dr. Anantha Nageswaran to speak, and then first and then inaugurate the...
Respected Shri Nandakumar, President, Bharat Krishak Samaj and former Secretary, Ministry of Agriculture, Government of India, Dr. Sanjay Garg, Deputy Director of Archives, National Archives of India, Mr. Ajay V. Jakar, who invited me to speak at this event, ladies and gentlemen. Not only did I arrive 5 minutes late, I have also been loaned some extra 5 minutes to speak by the Deputy Director of Archives, because he finished his remarks 5 minutes ahead of the time allotted to him, so thank you very much. Before I reflect on the role of agriculture in the Indian economy and the importance of the work that Bharat Krishak Samaj has done, for which we are all gathered here today, let me use this opportunity to congratulate BKS for the pivotal role that it has been playing over the course of the years in giving voice to the collective needs of farmers across the length and breadth of this country. As policymakers, we constantly endeavor to put in place policy mechanisms to better farmers' livelihoods. However, to know whether our efforts are yielding the intended benefits, and also whether we need to recalibrate and re-engage, forums like BKS must be there to represent the voices and concerns of the farming community. This is particularly so in a country like ours, where most farmers belong to the small and marginal category, and for whom farming is the basis of subsistence. Giving them a voice is essential as the Indian policy-making domain continues to explore ways and means to perfect farmer-friendly policies. And more importantly, speaking about the current event for which we are all gathered here today, the launch of the BKS archives, good policy making needs to employ a wide range of evidence: statistics, social studies, modeling, economics, political will. However, one thing that often seems to be absent from consideration is history. While history is valued in general, often invoking the phrase, "those who do not learn from history are doomed to repeat it," the sentiment is actually reflected very rarely in practical considerations within policy circles. That is because some argue that history presents us with neatly packaged axioms applicable to present and future circumstances, but a policy maker rarely experiences the privilege of well-defined problems and straightforward solutions. This limits the application of readily available historical lessons into decision-making and runs the risk of reducing the process of policy-making to simplistic aphorisms. Another commonly cited fact is the lessons from the past may not translate into effective solutions for the present because the context of the design of past policies differs from the context in which the world currently operates. This is another limitation or argument cited in favor of not paying attention to history. There is some truth to all these lines of argument, and indeed the role of policy makers is subject to many complexities, often unforeseen and unintended, but these do not serve the basis for disregarding the value history brings to present-day decision-making. A major benefit for a policy maker to utilize history lies in mapping out and understanding how the present came to be. India's agricultural sector has a rich history, replete with experiences and decisions that served to build the sector into the juggernaut that it is today. The Green Revolution, rice and wheat; White Revolution, milk and dairy products; the Yellow Revolution, oil seeds; the Blue Revolution, fish; and the Silver Revolution, egg and poultry, are just a few illustrative examples of the significant shifts the sector has gone through since 1966. While the argument is true that context today may be different from the context that prevailed in the past, let us remember the contexts themselves are not exempt from the forces of history. In other words, even just as history repeats, even contexts can repeat themselves. And in some sense, even if the contexts are very different, studying history tells us or gives us a starting point, an anchor, a point of departure to understand why the context today is different from the one that prevailed some 20, 40, 60 years ago, and therefore, what are the deviations that one needs to make, adjustments one needs to make sure that the lessons of history are applied in the right way. So in some sense, even if one doesn't fully import the lessons from history, it serves us as a good anchor and a starting point for discussion. For example, Ajay shared with me a couple of samples from the archives, and one was the speech by Mr. Gurupada Swami, who was a Minister of State for Food, Agriculture, Community Development and Cooperation in the late 1960s. And I quote from his article. He says, "A new nexus between industry and agriculture, increasingly higher levels of consumption among the rural population, more sophisticated and balanced food items, new patterns of urban and rural relationship, all these can be envisaged in the coming years," unquote. Now, can you tell me that this quote is not relevant today? We do need a new axiom or new nexus between industry and agriculture, We need higher levels of consumption among the rural population. We need balance between calorie and nutrition needs today, and we do need a new pattern of relationship between urban and rural India, even today. The other point that he makes, very importantly, while for some years the striving for self-sufficiency for the major crops will have to continue, and that is true even today because our yields are lower than the global average, not to talk about the global best in class, while for some years the striving for self-sufficiency for the major crops will have to continue, the need to diversify further the production and supplies in a manner calculated to enable the masses to have a balanced diet is also now amply recognized, unquote. So, for example, in the economic survey, we talk about the fact that allied services in agriculture, allied areas, I mentioned many of them, fisheries, dairy, poultry, and food processing, etc., are all growing at a much faster rate, and they need to grow, and therefore agriculture is not only about grains, production of food grains. It's much more than that, and that is the point he makes. The next point which he makes, which is more relevant today, is agriculture putting by enough savings to be drawn back into investment on itself? He's asking this question. And in fact, he hopes that in the coming years, when he wrote this article in the late 60s, agriculture will yield enough income to farmers for rural savings to increase. That raises the question of whether current policies do indeed boost agricultural income. And the second question, whether our statistical systems actually compute urban and rural savings separately. We don't. In fact, one of the initiatives, and I'm traveling to NABARD 2 weeks from now, because I have requested them to come up with indicators of rural economy, rural consumption, rural confidence, etc. Because right now, either we have urban indicators or national level indicators. We don't have a segregated understanding of what is happening in rural India, and NABARD of all institutions is far better placed than most to be able to provide that, and they have very readily agreed to engage in such an exercise, and they wanted to share with me the pilot studies and the design that they have done to be able to undertake these measurements of rural India down the road. Similarly, some of you might have noticed, if not, I encourage you to do so. The Federation of Automobile Dealers Association, FADA, FADA, releases every month a press release on the sale of automobiles, passenger vehicles, two-wheelers, three-wheelers, four-wheelers, commercial vehicles, SUVs, tractors, etc. In the last 2 months, if you noticed, they have started providing rural-urban split in this data of automobile sales. That is because we insisted and requested them that they do so, and we even helped them identify and map the PIN codes as reliably as we could in separating the rural PIN codes and the urban PIN codes so that we can see whether, because in the earlier period, two-wheeler sales in general was considered to be a proxy for rural consumption. But today, with the advent of electric two-wheelers, some people say two-wheeler sales of especially electric two-wheelers have boomed in urban India, therefore they may not be a good proxy for rural consumption and purchasing power, etc. It's a fair point, and therefore we needed, even within two-wheelers, we needed to see urban versus rural, and I'm happy to report to you that in the first 4 months of the current financial year, April to July, rural purchases of two-wheelers significantly outpace urban purchases of two-wheelers in terms of the growth rate. So that is a sign that things are beginning to look up, and we have a monsoon that is by and large done quite well as of now, and reservoir levels are higher than last year's and also higher than the 10-year averages, and some of the sowing of both the rice and wheat are at least 5% more than what they were last season. So all these things do augur well for agricultural income growth and also for rural consumption and spending power. But the point he makes about rural savings gives me an idea that I would like to carry with me to the Secretary Ministry of Statistics and try to find out if we could distinguish and gather data between urban and rural savings in order to, therefore we need to expand the range of information that we have about rural India, not just in the present, but also that of the past. The other sample that Ajay shared with me very helpfully, especially in the context of the fact that the Government of India will need to constantly augment its resources given development needs, given security needs, given infrastructure needs, is a story from 1972, which is 52 years ago, of Tamil Nadu government introducing a bill that raised the exemption limit for agricultural income tax. But the point to note is that there was an agricultural income tax and the exemption limit was increased from 4,000 to 5,000 rupees, and some specific crops and food items were also exempted from tax. But the point of the matter is that there was an agricultural income tax, and it is a topic that probably is worthy of re-examination as well. So in that sense, certainly policy makers of today will not say understanding or learning about history will be useless to them, especially given this topic. They would be very interested in understanding the history of how agricultural taxation used to happen in the past. So therefore, as Mr. Garg pointed out, the need to preserve traditional knowledge. He talked about idioms and proverbs, oral archives, and also he talked about, in some countries, talking about archives of smell and odor. It is very, very important that we understand what transpired in the past, because we all here in the Eastern tradition believe in the cyclical nature of events. We don't believe in the linear view of the world because we clearly believe what goes around comes around. So in that sense, it would be presumptuous on our part to think that some of the problems that we are confronting today are new and original, and that our forefathers and elders haven't confronted these problems. That is actually hubris. So in that sense, what they would have confronted, how they approached it, and therefore how they either solved them or did not, can contain very, very useful lessons for the problems we face today with respect to agriculture. And as we saw in the speech by the minister then in 1960s, some of those issues remain very salient. And that is what we touched upon, and I'm grateful to Mr. Nandakumar for mentioning that, for having read the economic survey and mentioning in his speech that in chapter 5 of the economic survey, where we talk about the medium-term growth outlook for India, we do mention that agriculture will continue to play a very, very important role. Because what is happening today is, if we talk of predominantly three large sectors of the economy, one is agriculture, then manufacturing and services, largely speaking. Manufacturing does face a very, very formidable competition from the large presence of China. And there are also other very promising manufacturing countries who have been somewhat ahead of the game than India, such as Vietnam, Mexico, Bangladesh, etc. We have certain advantages, because even with the quality issues that remain to be addressed in our education, the sheer number of technical graduates we produce is quite substantial, and we can make use of them in a productive way. And we have also been addressing many of the supply side infrastructure deficiencies that held back our manufacturing in the last 40 to 60 years. Nonetheless, there are limits to how much manufacturing can contribute, no matter how seriously we must take it, and we must indeed take it seriously. Manufacturing is not a sector of the past, but it is also a sector of the future. Similarly, when we take services, there are different kinds of challenges we need to confront. For example, just before coming here, I was reading a story in the Bloomberg News service that call center and business process outsourcing workers in the Philippines are beginning to feel the impact of artificial intelligence. So in that sense, low value added IT enabled services may come under threat from the introduction of artificial intelligence. Therefore, for a country of this size, We cannot be exclusionary in our approach to economic development. We can't say we'll only concentrate on services, we'll only concentrate on manufacturing, but we need to concentrate on agriculture, manufacturing, and services, because all of them have a role to play, and exclusive reliance on manufacturing and services, saying agriculture is something that is more appropriate for a low-income developing economy, but for an economy aspiring to become middle and upper middle income, agriculture is a sector of the past, no longer holds true. Because in a multipolar world, national food security is also a geostrategic opportunity. And that is something that we need to keep in mind. And further, therefore, how do we unshackle agriculture? Somebody said, the 1991 spirit of economic reforms has not touched the Indian education sector. And I could say the same thing about the agricultural sector also. The 1991 spirit of economic liberalization and reforms hasn't really touched the agricultural sector. In the name of supporting the farmers, we still continue to have lots of restrictions on, whenever prices rise, we are more focused on the burden that it imposes on consumers, a legitimate concern, but also we should understand that there is a trade-off there if we try to limit the prices from going higher and farmers taking advantage of those price signals. So there is a trade-off there. So farmers' terms of trade will be affected if we continue to curb food prices. Not only that, not only the terms of trade will be affected, but also the price signals are important information. Combined with price signals, farmers also need an insurance mechanism, because as the Govt theorem says, if prices go up this year and the farmers end up using that price signal and then plant more seedlings, next year's crop will be too much, will be abundant, and the prices will fall. There will be a glut. So you need a mechanism to balance out these cycles. So farmers need appropriate price signals to flow through to them. Farmers need a hedging mechanism, insurance mechanism, and some of the derivative markets, which are probably instruments of speculation when it comes to stocks, but could be extremely useful hedging instruments for producers, who are basically farmers. So, therefore, whether it is in terms of export restrictions or free import suddenly, or whether it is in restraining the functioning of futures and options markets, or in terms of creating insurance mechanisms, etc., we need to make sure that the Indian farmers get the appropriate price signals, especially as the minister had said way back in the 1960s, if we have to balance the production between calorie and nutrition, we also do need to move away from excessive focus on cereals, right? Because at the end of the day, we as a country are also considered to be greatly at the risk of heart diseases, of diabetes, etc. Therefore, continuing to incentivize rice, sugarcane, etc. isn't compatible with our water security, isn't compatible with our climate goals, and isn't compatible with our health considerations and attainments. After all, a demographic dividend will never be realized if the population doesn't turn out to remain healthy, both mentally, physically, and also emotionally as well. So in all these things, therefore, agriculture plays a very, very important part. And for that, agricultural history plays a very important part, and therefore BKS archives play a very important part. So it is difficult for me to contemplate the kind of value that the opening of these archives to the public, especially this democratic framework that this archive managers and BKS have adopted in throwing it open to the entire public. It is very difficult for me to, I have run out of my time, but let me conclude. It is very difficult to visualize the kind of impact it could have on future agricultural policies, but notwithstanding the difficulty that I have in visualizing, I remain extremely optimistic that the launch of these archives today will herald a very good future, not only for the sector, but also for policies related to the sector. Thank you once again for inviting me here and giving me the opportunity to share my thoughts with you.